Hi everyone, so today Angus, Ollie, Shannon, Will, and I will be talking about food waste at the retailer stage of the supply chain, and we'll be looking at some policies that might address this issue as well as the impacts of the policies on other parts of the food system. Right, so what is food waste? Food losses and food waste are big problems that the world has been facing and continues to face. So, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, food losses refer to the decrease in edible food mass throughout the part of the supply chain that specifically leads to edible food for human consumption. Food losses occur at the stages of the supply chain before the retailer and consumer stages of the supply chain, while food waste refer to the food losses at the stages of the retailer and consumer stage of the supply chain. So about 1/3 of the edible food produced for human consumption gets lost or wasted globally, which equals to roughly 1.3 billion of food waste per year. In middle and high-income countries, most of the food waste occurs at the retailer and consumer stages of the supply chain, whereas in low-income countries, food is mostly lost during the early and middle stages of the supply chain, and food waste is much less at the consumer level. So the graph shows that the per capita food loss in Europe and North America is greater than per capita food loss in other parts of the world. The per capita food wasted by consumers in Europe and North America was roughly 95 to 115 kilograms per year, which is 10 times greater than the per capita food wasted by consumers in the sub-Saharan Africa and Asia of only around 6 to 11 kilos a year. And this graph was created using information obtained by the FAO in 2009, and since then food waste has increased significantly due to people in poor countries earning more money, so they're wasting more food, and then the rich people in richer countries are also getting richer, so they're also wasting more food. So today we will be focusing on the food waste of fruits and vegetables occurring at the retail stage of the supply chain. Fruits and vegetables make up more than 45% of food losses, along with fruits and tubers, making them the highest wastage rated food products. Almost half of fruits and vegetables produced are wasted. There are several reasons for this. Most of these reasons are interrelated with the early stages of the food supply chain, such as production, processing stages, like overproduction, improper storage, and diseases. One of the reasons we want to highlight in today's presentation is the appearances of fruits and vegetables that fail to meet the retailer's appearance standards, and so they get rejected and wasted. Or if the retailers accept these, consumers refuse to purchase them and they still get thrown away and wasted. Ugly fruits and vegetables were the cause of up to 40% of fruits and vegetables wasted in 2013 due to retailers rejecting them for not meeting their appearance standards. In recent years, however, the sales of these ugly fruits and vegetables have gone up as people are more concerned about eliminating food waste. But a report published in 2017 still shows that 25% of apples, 20% of onions, and 13% of potatoes grown in the United Kingdom were still wasted due to the lack of aesthetic standards. In the next section of the presentation, we will be looking at 2 possible policies that can be used to address this problem.
Genetic modification is the process which enables the manipulation of an organism's genes, which can influence the characteristics expressed by the organism. Due to all living organisms containing DNA, GMO can be used on fruits, vegetables, and other food products. Currently, New Zealand legislation prevents the use of genetically modified seeds and organisms in food production. However, GMO food can be imported from other nations, which are then used in New Zealand food production. Genetic modification can be a hugely valuable tool for the development of fruit and vegetable varieties, which can allow producers to have greater certainty of physical characteristics of produce. By manipulating the physical attributes of fruit and vegetable produce, retailers are less likely to reject produce, and the customers will have greater access to fresh produce which are more uniform in shape and size. GMO can also influence the shelf life, which will provide consumers with better supply outside of typical growing seasons. This links to less food being imported. This means this has runoff effects such as lower transport emissions from overseas freight. GMO can also be applied to grazing pastures and feed resources for meat-producing animals. Low methane pastures can be fed to stock which reduce the level of methane passed by ruminant animals. As GMO is still a new practice, it still carries concerns for consumers on whether there will be potential negative health concerns that come from the produce. Some researchers have argued that GMO might contribute to the development of cancer. As a disease is caused by mutations in DNA, it is dangerous to introduce new genes into the body. However, the American Cancer Society has said that there is no evidence of this, but further research might be done. Some people believe the GMO foods have more potential to trigger allergic reactions. This is because they may contain genes from an allergen, a food that prompts an allergic reaction. This, however, is another area where there is no evidence yet, and GMO used has to prove that the gene being used does not cause the allergies. There is a small chance that the genes in a food can transfer to the cells, the body, or bacteria in the gut. Some GMO plants contain genes that make them resistant to certain antibiotics. It is a concern that this resistance could pass on to humans, although this is another area in which the WHO are confident is not an issue. Introducing GMO has concerns with how it may affect the biodiversity in New Zealand, as concerns always arise when bringing new DNA into an environment. This is an area in which Māori have shown concern as unforeseeable problems may turn up that affects the native flora and fauna and surrounding waterways. Implementing GMO can cause trade concerns with certain countries as it's still not yet fully accepted throughout the world. New Zealand holds a clean green image to overseas buyers that look to purchase products that are completely natural. GMO may harm this reputation that has made it one of the most sought after exporter of food related products.
The introduction of New Zealand policy which supports the use of genetic modification in food production is likely to have a varying impact on a number of groups. For food retailers, the introduction of GMO is likely to result in lower levels of food waste. Genetic modification allows produce to become more uniform in size, colour and shape, catering for specific customer preferences in relation to physical attributes. By catering food to meet customer preferences, food retailers can achieve substantially lower volumes of food waste due to less unsold and perished product being thrown away. New Zealand farmers will also be impacted from increased levels of production as genetic modification enables food produce to be more tolerant to pests, diseases and climatic conditions. This will hugely benefit the industry as uncertainty around farm production will fall, which could lead to higher levels of investment within the New Zealand primary industry. The New Zealand government is likely to be adversely affected due to the potential damage to trade relationships built upon New Zealand's reputation as a clean, green, GMO-free exporter. A change in this brand could result in New Zealand exports not taking preference in overseas markets, reducing the level and value of our exports and impacting the performance of our economy. Genetic modification does provide some benefit for the government as GMO offers an opportunity for New Zealand producers to become more environmentally friendly with the use of low methane, high productivity pastures and crops. This would be hugely beneficial for the New Zealand government as it's a tool to reducing the country's greenhouse gas emissions. Consumers in New Zealand households are likely to be most positively impacted as prices for food would fall. This would be due to the increased efficiency from producers who can achieve higher yields at lower costs using GMO production. As supply of food rises, prices are influenced downward, benefiting the consumers. In summary, the application of genetic modification comes at a relatively low financial cost but at a high risk due to the potential threat it poses for our food exports. Ultimately, genetic modification efficiently addresses the issue of food waste at a retail level, but does not outweigh the value New Zealand exports receive as being a GMO-free nation.
The general rubbish bin in most New Zealand households consists of predominantly food wastage and unrecyclable plastics. that end up in landfills. The proposed policy is to use food wastage from all areas of the supply chain by using food waste as an input for anaerobic digestion to break it down to digestate and biogas. Digestate can be used as fertiliser, whilst biogas is used as a renewable energy source. Anaerobic digestion of food waste is environmentally preferable to composting and landfill disposal. For this policy to be successful, it needs to be able to incentivise stakeholders from all parts of the supply chain to separate food waste from their general rubbish in the same way that they have been encouraged to separate recyclable rubbish.
Biogenic food waste excretes significant amounts of methane once dumped into a landfill. Methane emissions from landfills represent the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions by the waste sector. By using food waste as a renewable energy source, New Zealand would significantly reduce its carbon footprint from the waste disposal sector. The government would have to invest significantly into effective waste management infrastructure that is suitable for large-scale anaerobic digestion. For further practicality at a large scale, the government needs to incentivise farmers, food processors, supermarkets and households to go through the effort of sorting their rubbish. Ways the government can do this is by subsidising power for households and food processing businesses that supply bio-waste management services. This would mean that they would have to receive a discounted price for their energy source. Farmers that supply waste management services can also receive discounted prices for fertiliser. The implementation of the policy would be very costly for the government initially, as it would take significant amounts of government investment to make anaerobic digestion infrastructure large enough to be effective as a renewable energy source. Subsidisation in the initial stages of the policy's implementation is necessary to be able to change stakeholders' habits. Once stakeholders become accustomed to changes in waste management, subsidisation will no longer be required. Once the government has enticed large food processors and supermarkets to join, they will be able to expand its anaerobic digestion infrastructure and waste management services. This will make the cost of renewable energy from anaerobic digestion less through the economies of scale. The overall outcome for this policy is positive, as it makes efficient use of food waste as an input for power and fertiliser. It also reduces greenhouse gas emissions from landfills and provides a renewable energy source at a potentially large scale. Whether or not this policy will be effective depends on the overall contribution of all stakeholders throughout the supply chain. The government would be worse off from this policy initially, as it would be extremely costly and may not be efficient in its early stages of development. As large stakeholders commit to the policy, the government will eventually benefit, as it will make a significant contribution to them meeting their zero carbon requirements. Food processors will benefit, as they will be rewarded by discounted power from the anaerobic digestion power plants if they choose to supply their food waste to the power plants. Farmers also have the opportunity to contribute production waste from things such as fruit or grain, which are not suitable to be sold at market. Farmers could be rewarded with either power or cheaper fertiliser for their contribution of production waste. A potential rise in tax rates may be required to kickstart the anaerobic digestion industry. Increased taxes would negatively impact households, as they will have less disposable income to spend. However, the proportion of society that chooses to contribute to the new waste management program will benefit from the new policy, as they will receive renewable energy at a discounted cost. Government investment into the industry will open up more job opportunities available to society, which will be another benefit.
In conclusion, GMO would not be the wisest option, as this places too much risk on trade relationship, New Zealand exports, and may cause damage to the economy. The biomass policy would mean that the government would have to invest into the infrastructure in order to make the policy efficient. Although this would have a large initial cost for the government, this would have a large environmental impact, with decreasing one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the waste sector. Subsidisation could potentially be the most effective way of implementing this strategy. However, overall, our recommendation would be for the government to implement the biomass policy.